Welcome back to America's Talking. I'm Cole McNeely. On the heels of the Super Bowl, today we will be discussing the topic of taxpayer-funded sports stadiums, and we've got three great reporters from the Center Square here to discuss this with us today. First, I'm going to go over to Jon Syf. Jon, you cover Tennessee for the Center Square. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, it's great to be here.
We've also have Joe Mueller out of Missouri. He's unfortunately a St. Louis Cardinals fan, but we won't hold that against him.
And in the great state of Missouri, I am in St. Louis, but we are having a Super Bowl parade today over in Kansas City, about a 4-hour drive to the west. So you could probably pass anything to do with the Chiefs today if you were out there campaigning.
The new villains of the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs. Thanks for joining us today, Joe. We've also have Morgan Sweeny, who covers Virginia and a little bit of Maryland for the Center Square. Morgan, thanks for joining us today on America's Talking.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Jon, I'm going to start with you. This topic of taxpayer-funded sports stadiums is interesting on a couple different levels, partially because this is not just a coastal issue or a big city issue. I mean, we see this all across the country, and we're seeing patterns in terms of the pitches, in terms of the environments around these. Let's just do a lay of the land. What is going on across the United States when it comes to these massive taxpayer-funded sports stadiums?
So everything's local, as we've discussed, but what's true is that politicians everywhere are going to tell you it's a good thing for you to pay a bunch of money for your local sports team to get a new stadium or to get a renovation. And right now we're seeing a wave of these stadiums getting replaced. And part of the reason for that is all the federal money that went into state budgets. They had some excess. You saw places like Nashville, New York, they're going to build new NFL stadiums there. You know, the Arizona Coyotes tried to put one in, tried to tell people, hey, we're paying for it all ourselves, but don't make us pay property taxes. You know, there's a lot of different ways that the public can fund these things. But what's true of all of them is that the politicians are going to tell you, well, it pays for itself. Well, this one's different than every one that's been studied before. Well, you know, this tax doesn't count because, you know, it's a new building and this is all new money. And it's almost never true.
And Morgan, as Jon mentioned, this is across the country, and there are places who actively are trying to recruit sports teams from other locations, again, claiming that angle of an entertainment district, claiming that economic benefit. I mean, what are we seeing in Virginia?
Yeah, perfect example of that here in Virginia. So Monumental Sports and Entertainment, which is owned by Ted Leonsis, I think that's how you say his name. They have been in D.C. for a long time now at Capital One Arena. The Washington Wizards is an NBA team, and the Capitals is the NHL team. But Leonsis has been unhappy with his deal with the city there, often kind of complaining that they won't pay for things that he wants them to pay for, renovations and such on the building. And so Virginia had kind of been courting him, I think, behind the scenes. And then in December, he and Governor Youngkin announced that they want to bring this $2 billion entertainment district to a neighborhood in Alexandria. So then the Wizards and the Capitals would move over there. So it's kind of a big deal here right now.
Well, and again, that gets to an interesting conversation of the leverage of these sports teams. And Joe, I want to bring you in real quick. You mentioned St. Louis and you mentioned Kansas City. I mean, it's a sports area in the state of Missouri. Super Bowls have been falling off of trees left and right, it seems like, in the state. You know, at the end of the day, all of a sudden, Missouri is a sports center of the NFL. And sounds like some of these sports teams are trying to start to use that leverage for their benefit.
The Royals have just yesterday announced plans for a new stadium downtown. And in the previous weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, the Chiefs and the Royals came together to advocate for a 3/8 cents sales tax increase for improvements to the Chiefs Stadium to build a new baseball stadium downtown. So that's going to come up on the April ballot. You would think that winning a Super Bowl this week would be a shot in the arm with the people of Jackson County who are going to be asked not only just this sales tax increase won't start until 2031 because the previous sales tax increase is 25 years from 2006 to 2031. The county executive is Frank White, who used to play center field for the Royals, and he is standing up and saying the Royals have to provide a transparent deal so all the taxpayers see what's going to happen. And, sometimes you hear that with our elected leaders, sometimes you don't. But I think that, at least in Kansas City, both teams came out and said, hey, we want to stay here, but you have to help us out in order to stay here. Yeah, stay here as long as you make it comfortable for us, right? I mean, that's the general idea. And one of the things, Joe, I'm going to stick with you real quick. You kind of talk about that idea of, well, if you want to keep us, these are the terms. And this is something we've seen in Missouri, right? In St. Louis, we've seen this before with the Rams. And I mean, even with lawsuits coming out because of the Rams leaving. So let's take a step back into history real quick. In Missouri, there's history around sports teams and drama and stadiums. True. In a previous life, I was a sports writer, and I covered the last football game that the Cardinals played before they went to Arizona. So we didn't build a stadium for the Cardinals. We ended up building a stadium without a team. We thought the Patriots were going to come here. They didn't. So we had to find a team. We found the Rams. They came here, but there was a stipulation in the contract that if the stadium wasn't in the top 4 or 5 stadiums throughout the NFL, they could move. Well, St. Louis scrambled to try and build a new stadium, couldn't do it in time, and Stan Kroenke had already made plans to move out to Los Angeles. And St. Louis City and County sued that the NFL violated the terms of their moving clauses, and the NFL and Kroenke settled before going to trial a couple of weeks before the Super Bowl. So now St. Louis and St. Louis City and County have about $750 million from them that we're still deciding what to do. And we have a stadium downtown that is vacant. And as Whitey Herzog said when he was talking about the big new stadiums down in Florida back in the 80s, if you don't have a team, you have the world's largest bingo parlor. Well, and St. Louis certainly has one of them. And John, beyond St. Louis, that is not a unfamiliar story to hear. A city invest in some sports stadium, thinking they're going to recruit a team, thinking a team's coming. And guess what? We got a sweetheart deal and we're not leaving our hometown. And all of a sudden, the taxpayers are kind of left holding the bag. And we've seen the Chicago White Sox do this a couple times. They went and talked to Nashville. Nashville wants a baseball team. They did that as leverage against Chicago, trying to get more tax money. They did it previously in Tampa, and then ultimately a stadium was built there, and they got an expansion team, but it wasn't right away. What you really have to look at in this is who's the biggest beneficiary of putting a bunch of money into a renovation or putting a bunch of money into a new stadium, and it's the ownership. A couple groups, Forbes and Sportico, do evaluations of teams, how much they're worth. And one of the things that you see is as soon as somebody gets a new stadium or gets a big renovation, the valuation goes way up. The Las Vegas Raiders got the new stadium. A lot of that's paid for with a hotel tax in Las Vegas. Now the team's worth way more than it was previously. They just sold this 10% stake to Tom Brady and his group. I want to say it's $5.8 billion it's worth now. Same thing happened in Nashville. The team got the new stadium. There was a lot of rumors it was going to get sold. The valuation went up 33%, and we still haven't seen what's going to happen next. The Orioles did a similar thing. They got promises of a renovation. They ended up selling the team right away. The Maryland AG is even upset about it, like, we were lied to about this. Orioles fans are happy because they have new ownership. Maybe they're going to start spending money. They showed it right away, a day after the announcement they made the trade for the Brewers' best player, but it wasn't good for taxpayers in Maryland. And Morgan, I want to go back to you. So, one of the things that John just hit on was this idea of the taxpayers putting up a lot of cash,
or tax incentives. So, I mean, one way or the other, it's going to get paid for through the tax system. So no matter how you kind of skin the cat, the cat's getting skinned. One of the things that Jon mentioned was the ownership groups really being the ones who benefit from these deals. Inherently, this brings some amount of backlash, particularly around the idea of the opportunity cost of the amount of funds that are going toward sports stadiums, where I think a lot of people would say, man, we're putting that much money toward that when we've got problems X, Y, and Z going on.
Yeah. So there's actually been some protest in Alexandria by locals who don't want the stadium complex to come there because they don't want to put their tax dollars toward making somebody super rich richer. And I mean, that is ultimately what it does. And they will be using tax increment based financing in this project as well. So the taxes collected from people spending money in this entertainment district are going to go toward repaying the loans that are taken out to finance all of it.
Well, and we're focusing a lot on the cost side, but and Morgan, I'll stick with you on this. What are the claims? I mean, are they out there claiming that there is a real economic benefit? Like, well, listen, yeah, it's going to cost money. It's going to be all this, but it's really going to be positive in the long run. I mean, is that what's being pitched by legislators and advocates for this big investment?
Yes, absolutely. I was just talking to an economist yesterday who told me, he said, these deals have a script and everybody follows the script. And part of that script is that in the process of the deal, the team or the local government or the state government, somebody commissions this economic impact study, and that's done by another agency. And they always claim these incredible, too good to be true economic benefits, like this entertainment district is supposed to bring in $12 billion of economic impact over several decades, and it's going to supply 30,000 permanent jobs to Virginia. And if you talk to economists, they'll tell you that those studies are pretty much garbage and that they wouldn't survive in anything that was peer reviewed. But politicians like to cite them in all these situations, and they take them as fact. And you'll hear those numbers a gazillion times in any discussion of this deal that's going on. Well,
and Joe, I mean, I'm a sports guy, right? I'm a sports fan. So, Morgan mentioned the numbers may be fugazi. We don't really know. I mean, she mentioned the fact there's a script when it comes to this stuff. And as you know, Joe, the NFL season's been scripted the past couple of years. That's the rumors going around. That's what I've heard. I mean, I'm not going to say the Center Square is reporting it, but that's the rumor. The Kansas City Chiefs has won back-to-back Super Bowls on that NFL script. And it's hard to say that, man, if Kansas City lost the Chiefs, that wouldn't leave a huge cultural hole. I mean, is there an immeasurable value for having a cultural center of a sports team that ties the community together? I mean, is that something you can measure?
Well, one thing you have to give Kansas City credit for, they have their act together when it comes to convention business and tourism, because they landed the World Cup for 2026, a regional area. And that was huge because they beat out some major markets in the Northeast to get those games. So, there'll be, I believe it's 6 teams that are going to come into Kansas City, buy hotel rooms. So, there's multi-purposes, if you will, to what they've done in Kansas City. But I will add, when the Rams went away and the Convention and Visitors Bureau here in St. Louis really got their knuckles rapped, but they told the truth. Not having 8 dates where the Rams were playing, they could book 8 conventions there and sell a lot more hotel rooms than having the football team play there. So there's a lot of give and take. The state of Missouri sent $4 million for new lights for the minor league ballpark in Springfield, Missouri. So the 6 million people in Missouri each paid almost $1 so they could get new lights for the baseball stadium down there. What does that do? Well, it's tourism. It's a hour from Branson. Boy, sometimes when you look at economic development and putting some gas on the fire to get things heated up, You can see that there's some benefit, and yet, maybe there's a way that we can begin to wean ourselves off of these taxpayer-funded items and put the burden back on the benefactors.
Well, and John, that's an interesting point Joe just brought up, which is the people, as you mentioned earlier, John, that benefit from this are the billionaire owners. They are, that's the groups that benefit from holding cities, states, holding them hostage about, hey, we're going to leave, we're not going to leave, will they stay, will they go? It would be a great romance novel if it was written that way. So, are the tides changing on this, John, or are we just going to be in a perpetual motion of billionaire sports owner holds a city hostage and potentially pulls an Ursay and, gets a trailer in the middle of the night and leaves Baltimore, right? Is this just the reality and there's no change in this?
I think that's something that hasn't changed for a long time. The one thing that's different now is the numbers are way, way bigger. The public incentives are bigger. The teams are worth more, especially the NFL teams with all the shared revenue and the TV contracts. It's just exploding. But I think that one of the things you hit on, what's the real benefit to these teams in a city? I think the Atlanta Braves are a great example. They moved out of the city. They moved into a new stadium. They build a development around it. Everybody now, when they're putting together their stadium, they say, we want something like the Braves have. The reality here are two things. One is the whole development around the Braves stadium does the same amount of revenue as a Walmart store. They got a ton of subsidy, but they do the same as one Walmart store. And the other thing that's true is where the Braves stadium used to be, Fulton County Stadium, that area is thriving with business right now. They make all these claims that, you need the baseball team to build the thing. The reality is you don't. The same thing happened in Arizona where the Coyotes were going to build. They tried to build this whole area with hotels, theater, everything around it. The reality is they can build that without the hockey stadium. They can build that without the basketball arena. You can build that without the baseball stadium. Those things aren't necessary, and a lot of times they get in the way of those other things succeeding because nobody wants to go next to the baseball stadium to go to a movie because where are you going to park? How are you going to get there? That's when you talk about the opportunity cost of something like this, and you talk about the benefits for a city, you also got to talk about the negativity for everything else around there on the day of a game.
And Morgan, that's an interesting point that John brings up, and you have a situation on the ground right now that you're seeing in live action. It seems like for most public projects, it seems like there is a standard for some, and there's a different standard for sports teams, sports stadiums. What are some of the detractors saying in, Virginia about trying to recruit these teams over and bring them in? Does it seem like there's a double standard here? If this was, instead of a sports stadium, if this was the most beautiful parking garage you've ever seen, that this would be approached in a different way?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, again, the same person I was talking to was just saying yesterday, how we don't know why it is, but it seems, at least in America, with our culture, politicians and legislators, they just seem to really lose their minds when it comes to these sports entertainment districts. And they make promises to them that they wouldn't make to any other business. And so, yeah, really, it's just fundamentally unfair at the bottom of it.
Is it popular? Is that why it is? Is it a political play? Is it just such a popular thing to be, hey, I'm the politician that brought in team X, Y, or Z? Is that why the push is? That could explain the cultural aspect.
Yep, you said it. That really is the way that it is.
Well, I don't think we're going to solve all the world's problems. And unfortunately, until we pull our money together and buy out a team, I don't think we're going to change this anytime soon. Joe, John, Morgan, thanks for joining us today. This is a fascinating topic and one that I genuinely think people feel conflicted on, of saying, man, I love my sports teams. I love, I love Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. I've been living vicariously through them for the last year. And it's like, this is, as you mentioned, Morgan, it's part of the culture. This is a part of Americana. But in reality, it's also taking taxpayer dollars away when there's a litany of other issues we're facing in the country. So, hey, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And I want to thank you listeners for checking out America's Talking. The last couple episodes have been on homelessness and the migrant crisis. So if you haven't checked those out, go back and listen to the catalog. If you want to check out more of our great podcasts, go to americastalking.com.
Get creative with Skillshare. Explore thousands of hands-on creative classes with one inspiring membership. Watch, play, learn, discover. Follow the link in our show description to join Skillshare today and get 1 month free.